truly just my imagination. But to be completely fair and honest, it was this experience with the UFO in 1990 that really started me on the strange road I've been traveling ever since.
Can you find some connection between the paranormal and the ufological incidents, and why?
UFOs and the paranormal seem to go hand in hand, in my opinion. And in fact, my first real investigation of anomalous light activity involved a ghost story or myth and a haunted road. And that was in the late 1990s. And at the time, I was very fortunate to have the guidance of physical trace case specialist Ted Phillips, as well as our mutual friend from Project Orbwatch, who really offered me a lot in the way of support and encouragement. And they really got me through that first investigation. In that case, while we could debunk some of the odd light activity to car headlights or headlamps through repeatable and then verifiable experiments, we could not debunk all of the things that were reported at the time, including some of the anomalous lights. And to this day, that location, which is in Port Perry, Ontario, it's called Scugog Island. It is the location of different UFO reports, ghostly apparitions, and even on occasion an alien-like creature. Now, while I do in one sense appreciate a very nuts and bolts approach to the phenomena, the one tangible vehicle to the story is the human witness. And to ignore certain aspects of the experience that is described by the very people who are witnessing them as paranormal is a folly that I feel that some of the nuts and bolts ufologists tend to fall into. And these paranormal or very human aspects of these experiences is where parapsychology, in my opinion, can play a very strong role in UFO investigations. What I'm referring to here are things such as telepathy, or ESP, synchronicity, and the apparition-like appearances and or behavior of the aliens or UFO pilots, so to speak, that are sometimes reported along with the UFO experience, or the sighting of what appears to the witness to be an alien craft or an alien spaceship. Now, as someone who has been both immersed in the study of UFO encounters and paranormal phenomena, such as poltergeists, I can confidently say there are many parallels to both types of experiences. Dr. Jacques Vallée began noting these in the 1960s, and Dr. Alan Hynek also came to the same conclusions that these UFOs were in part paranormal events. And he spent a lot of time here in Toronto and then with the Toronto Society for Psychical Research exploring the connection and the possible connections between psychic events and UFOs. Now, I was also fortunate enough to discover the work of the late scholar Hilary Evans, who also noted in his comparative study of entity cases that UFO pilots have much in common with Virgin Mary visions and ghostly visitors. And they actually have a lot in common in how they appear, the circumstances in which they appear, and the effect that they have on the witnesses. Even minor things such as the falling leaf pattern, which is occasionally reported in UFOs, like the craft is falling or the UFO seems to be falling in a leaf pattern, is also reported in objects seemingly moved by unseen hands in some of the poltergeist cases. So to me, that's always been fascinating to see that there are these parallels in these observed patterns if you just are willing to have a look at them, or take a serious look at both subjects kind of side by side. And it is my goal in part to see more parapsychological study involved with the UFO topic. I think that the entire subject of UFOs could certainly benefit from some serious parapsychological analysis being applied to it. Unfortunately, ufology, at least in the minds of many of the general public, seemed to have fallen off a cliff since the days of Dr. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée and the Invisible College. Academics, scholars, scientists, well, they're reluctant to get involved, in part because of the crazy conspiracy theories, the very simplistic and cult-like behavior of the true ETH believers. And this, of course, includes the scientific parapsychologists as far as, their feelings towards UFOs in general. If you were to look at the Parapsychological Association, which is a professional association, it is made up of academics and professionals. And if you are to look at their website, it openly states they do not study UFOs. And that is a direct result of the ugly taste left by mainstream ufology. And really, who can blame them? It's sad. It really is, because it is a topic that is, of course, dear to my heart. And I would like to see more science and more serious scholarly or academic approach taken to the topic. UFO accounts, they're much like dreams, and they seem to contain a symbolic message that doesn't necessarily appear to mean what their content means. And I hope you're following me with that. Are they really alien visitors in its most simplistic interpretation? Or is something else going on, perhaps even grander than we can possibly know with the subject of UFOs? I like to think of a fish in a bowl and how he interprets if he does all the outside world at all, and the shock of occasionally encountering this alien hand that's reached in and is disturbing his known environment. Maybe he's cleaning the bowl. I'm borrowing that directly from Michio Kaku, but you get the idea. At least I hope you do. I do question how these myths or information are manifesting themselves through matter, and I have a very naive sort of hypothesis as to how this might be occurring. But that alone could take up an entire podcast and is perhaps better left for another day. I'd like to call that my grand cloud theory. And I know we've discussed it before, but discussing it to a general listenership, I think, is perhaps worthy of a podcast simply on its own. Much like Jacques Vallée and Chris Aubeck, I too believe this is a very old phenomena, and that it greatly predates the Kenneth Arnold sightings of 1947 and the interpretation of flying saucers, and that's pretty much is what popularly seems to define ufology today, is that 1947 sighting. I do think it is a much older phenomena, though. And again, the common tangible thread between all of this is the human being experiencing the phenomena. Whether they were experiencing it in medieval times or caveman times or even just yesterday, it really is about the human being and their narratives of their own experiences. Now, since the mid-2000s, approximately, I've been working with a dear friend of mine, and he's a fellow scholar, Dr. Eric Willett. He is also a UFO experiencer, and he happens to be the Canadian liaison for the Parapsychological Association. Now, we've been considering social psi, or social psychic events, as a potential cause for mass UFO sightings or outbreaks when they are truly anomalous. I say it as a potential, as it's a bit of a novel idea, and it's more designed to really kickstart some new and much needed alternative discussion on the subject, as opposed to just saying, okay, this is it is social psi, mystery is solved, game over, no. It's just some ideas that are being worked on just to kind of kickstart some new discussion on this topic. To try and understand social psi, or to try and put it simply, is to think of it in the terms of the sky being haunted, that these are literally apparitions, much like ghosts or poltergeists, and perhaps they are being created by the human beings themselves, the actual witnesses. Now, I've provided some of the background research, and I've edited Eric's book, Illuminations, which came out earlier this year, for people who are perhaps interested in looking into social psi as a potential cause for some of the UFO waves. Illuminations is available through Anomalous Press, and it discusses some of the more famous cases, such as the Belgian UFO wave of 1990, which also happened to include the lesser-known Russian wave of the late 1989 going into the early 90s. Lesser known, though it was very much investigated at the time by Russian ufologists and Dr. Jacques Vallée. We also look at the Rendlesham Forest case. There is the Canadian UFO wave of 1967. And these are sort of looked at in part using Walter von Lukadou's model of pragmatic information as this way of a lens or an analysis tool to look at these waves in a different way. Now, Walter von Lukadou is a physicist, but also a parapsychologist in Germany, and he runs a parapsychology clinic in Germany. And it was some of his ideas that we used as a form of analysis. Because UFOs are occasionally physically measurable via radar signatures, or they leave physical traces, this idea of social psi being used to, perhaps explain some UFOs has been loudly, and I mean loudly, poo-pooed by some mainstream UFO crowd. However, the same can be said for ghosts, particularly poltergeists, that also occasionally they too create physical, measurable phenomena. So again, I think that if people actually were well-rounded, I guess, in both topics, they'd see that this isn't too weird or too far apart, because there is physical phenomena as well on the parapsychology or the psi side that is on occasion measurable. None of these ideas really are new. Dr. Vallée and Dr. Hynek were discussing them 40 some odd years ago. However, in my own opinion, it's high time that we went back to before ufology fell off that cliff and re-examined those very ideas that were being talked about in the 1970s, when there was just still so much promise for the science and research of UFOs. To be honest, if it wasn't for Dr. Hynek and Jacques Vallée, you and a handful of other people, I would have left UFO studies long ago, completely disheartened with the mess that it has become and is today. I want to take this quick opportunity to give a shout out to my dear friend Virgilio Sanchez Oseo of the Miami UFO Center, whose book, UFOs, the Physical and Psychic Phenomena, details his experiences studying UFO phenomena in South America with his good friend and mentor, the late Dr. Alan Hynek. In his book, he includes psychic or paranormal phenomena that they had both witnessed, and how in some ways they both came to the conclusion that definitely in part these phenomena are psychic or paranormal in nature. In my opinion, it will take many great minds and new and alternative hypotheses from across different disciplines attacking away at the UFO enigma if we are ever to hope at trying to understand it. This is why I was so happy to learn of the Paris workshops in 2014. I see that it was a great diverse group of people, and my only hope is that parapsychology and UFOs may be represented in any future workshops of the like.
How do you see the application of the scientific method in parapsychology and ufology?